Welcome back here on Live Now from Fox, 7:33 on the East Coast and 4:33 on the West Coast. On Wednesday, tomorrow, the NTSB will start its three-day investigative hearing on the January 29th mid-air collision between an American Airlines regional jetliner and a Black Hawk helicopter over the Potomac River near Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Live Now's Stephanie Coueignoux spoke with former NTSB Deputy Managing Director about what information we can expect from the hearing.
Paul, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us here on Live Now from Fox as we take a look ahead to this three-day NTSB hearing about the DC Black Hawk helicopter plane collision. You know, a lot of people aren't familiar with these types of proceedings. As we look towards what is going to happen over the next 3 days, what can you share with us about the process?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Stephanie. I appreciate it. So most of the public is used to the board's investigative hearings in terms of the final report, right? So the board will conduct an investigation, the staff will put out a temporary or a draft report, the board will come together and debate that and then put out the final product. This investigative hearing is a little bit different because it's actually a step in a process to get additional factual information from witnesses that will help elucidate the certain investigative avenues that the board is looking at.
So as you say that, obviously the NTSB has been investigating this crash for months now. When you're talking about witnesses who may come forward, you know, who might these people be?
Sure. So what happens in the hearing is the 6 months that have happened since the accident, the board has developed some, avenues of investigation that they're looking at, and they want to gather some additional factual information and show the public that there's progress being made. So what they're going to do is call witnesses that can speak to some of the factual evidence that will be presented during the course of the hearing. And what's going to happen is, first of all, the board members and the staff from the Office of Aviation Safety will question the witnesses. It could be someone from air traffic control. It could be someone from the training program at one of the air carriers. It could be someone from the U.S. Army, depending on what the issues are, right? And so then they'll delve down into asking these questions. The witnesses are put under oath before they start discussing what they're going to discuss. Oftentimes, the staff will put up images or text document or technical document to help elucidate what more they're going to be talking about. And then the parties to the investigation, there are 10 parties to this investigation, can ask questions of the witnesses as well to get additional information from them. Then they'll call the next round of witnesses, and it just keeps going like that for the 3 days.
So, obviously the mission for the NTSB is to gather more information, but also to share with the public the progress that's been made. As someone who used to work with the NTSB, specifically during this hearing, what are you looking to hear, or, are there certain pieces of information that you're particularly focused on?
Right. Well, the agenda for the meeting hasn't been put out yet. That usually comes out the day before. So, and the other thing that will happen the morning of the first day of the hearing, the docket will be released, and the docket is the repository of all the investigative information that will be used to discuss the evidence during the hearing, and that's typically will number thousands of pages. There'll be technical documents in there. There could be portions of the cockpit voice recorder, some of the flight data recorder data could be presented. So what I would be looking at is once that docket opens, you'll get a much better idea, and the agenda gets released, you get a much better idea what the investigative avenues are going to be during the hearing discussions.
I think for the general person in the public, the burning question continues to be, how did this happen? Do you feel that this question will be answered during the 3-day hearing?
No, it's not the goal of the hearing to determine probable cause. That will come 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, depending on when the final report is put together. Again, this is a step in a process. It shows transparency by the board. It will show the media and the public some of the key areas that the NTSB is looking at. Because, of course, if you think of a 3-day hearing, if they're not going to talk about weather, weather's not an issue. They're not going to talk about the landing procedures or whatever it might be, right? Those won't be the focus of it. So once that agenda comes out, we'll have a much better idea of what the focus is going to be. And that's a good telegraph too for further on down the line, for when the final report is worked on. We'll get an idea of kind of where the board is headed with their thoughts.
And also shifting gears a little bit, when it comes to the process that these investigations entail, it's very arduous. It's very detail oriented. The NTSB wants to be incredibly precise. Typically, how long do these sorts of investigations take?
So for a major commercial aviation accident, generally it's a year to 18 months. Somewhere up to 2 years, depending on the complexities. I know in talking to some colleagues at the board, they're really trying to get this to the 1-year mark. We're at 6 months with the investigative hearing. Again, we'll have a much better idea once the hearing starts to unfold about how close they are to closing this out. The board did come out with an early recommendation a couple months after the accident, and it was in March, that talked about the airspace issues around DCA to try and make sure those are less complicated. So that's something the board typically does. If they find there's an early issue that can be addressed, they can put out an early recommendation, and they did do that here. So we see that there is an issue with the airspace that the board was focused on. Could that come up in this hearing? Possibly. We may learn a little bit more about that.
So when it comes to describing to the average citizen what this component means to the overall investigation, how would you describe the hearing to folks?
Yeah, it's going to look a bit like a legal proceeding because you have witnesses that are sworn under oath, you have evidence being presented, you have questions by investigators. So there'll be a bit of a legal feel to it. There'll be a transcript provided at the end of the hearing a few days afterwards. That's very typical of the process. So we'll have a legal look to it, but it's not a legal proceeding. This is an investigative hearing to again, determine some additional facts, gather additional evidence, gain knowledge about areas where they feel they haven't had the knowledge yet to understand what's going on. So it'll be a very technical 3 days for folks watching it. There'll be presentations by perhaps some of the board members. The chairman I think, usually does a lead-in kind of opening remarks. Here's what we've learned so far. Here's what we're going to be looking at. So we'll hear that. But from my experience and having worked many of these investigative hearings, they are highly technical in nature.
So do you anticipate any shocking information or bombshells, if you will, to come out of these 3 days?
I don't expect that, but you never know what's going to happen. You get a witness on the stand and they reveal something. We certainly see that in other legal cases. But here, it's hard to say. I think the board has been very forthcoming in the early days after the accident and with the early recommendation about what they're focused on. And the board is not, they're not an organization that likes a lot of drama. They're investigators, right? They want to focus on determining the cause and preventing it from happening again.
And information oriented, for sure. You mentioned a little bit earlier transparency. How paramount is transparency when it comes to these sorts of tragedies and the ensuing investigation?
Yeah, what I found when I was working at the board and certainly my predecessors before I was there, transparency was the key thing that made the board so successful in its work. By showing everything that they've learned, by folding in the parties who provide technical support. The parties are not board employees. They're folks from the manufacturer, from the Air Traffic Controllers Association, whoever it might be, that provide technical support. They're built into the process. The dockets that are put out during an investigation, especially like for this hearing and at the end of the process, shows every piece of information that led up to the decisions about the probable cause and the safety recommendations. So, and for the family members who have experienced this accident and are working through that process, the transparency is key because they want to understand what happened, and the board's able to provide that to them.
All right. Well, Paul, we really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through this. You're well informed in terms of this particular topic, but a lot of people, this might be the first time that they've ever been seeing these hearings. So we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us here on Live Now from Fox.
A big thank you to my colleague Stephanie Coueignoux for that interview here as we do prepare for that NTSB investigation hearing that is expected to get underway tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern time. We're going to bring it to you here on Live Now from Fox. As you heard, there is the potential that it won't last for all 3 days, according to the experts there, but we will make sure to keep you posted right here on Live Now from Fox as they work that investigation. 7:43 on the East Coast and 4:43 on the West Coast. Going to head to a quick 2-minute break, but so much more live news to get to in just a few. You're watching Live Now from Fox.